Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, for today's DM guide, we are covering a tricky subject, and that is the subject of prophecies. Legends foretold, futures foreshadowed, so many different things that we can utilize that just add that extra bit of flair and flavor and all these different things to your games. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the mystical high fantasy variety of prophecies. It can even be something as simple as like doing a time skip Tarantino style for so many of his different films, where you describe a scene at some point in the future involving the characters and you describe how they're set up, what they're kind of arrayed against. Getting to that point from wherever you plan on starting them in gameplay can be a bit tricky because you have to be, on the one hand, you want to be flexible in allowing the players to explore the world, react to these different things and situations, and get themselves into different situations. So you don't want to just railroad them and make them feel like that they're stripped and deprived of all choice, because then, that on the one hand you still are maintaining prophecy, but you're not giving them any choice in the matter. You are sending them, firing them at a predetermined point, and that doesn't feel like there's any sort of free will or any point in them playing. And that actually takes away a lot from the gameplay. It really, really, really does. Unless your players are very, very okay with just being railroaded, which, there's some groups that maybe like that, but most players enjoy exercising their character's free will, or at least feeling like they are. If you weave that illusion around them, it helps massively. And that's where being flexible comes in. You can be flexible, but still steer them because, well, prophecies are, while they are tricky things, there's something that you can bend the rules of and even break a little bit, because just because there's a prophecy doesn't mean it's actually going to come true. A very particular case in point that I have in mind actually involves a prestige class from 3rd edition that actually was centered around champions of Grumsh, the orc god. I was going to say the orc god of war, but really not. That's really all there is to Grumsh from 3rd edition. He's just an orc war deity, just a god of savagery and mindless violence, and he encourages his chosen people to do the same. And these champions of Grumsh, they get a prophecy that shows them the moment they are going to die. Now, here's the thing with that though. The DM is encouraged to describe that situation, to make that prophecy, and, however much or little detail they want. They can be as vague or as specific as they want. But the ability specifically stated, it doesn't have to be true. What's important is that the orc believes that it's going to be true. That way, they know when their predetermined, predestined point of death is, so they are going to throw themselves into combat without any fear. They're going to be terrible, horrifying berserkers, reaping a bloody toll on the battlefield, slaughtering the enemies of Groomsh and orc kind, without any sort of fear, regardless of whether or not Groomsh's protection is actually around them. If they do manage to make it to their predestined point of death, well then, hey, they got there knowing that they served Groomsh well. But even if they don't, that just means that they are a useful minion who is walking willingly into the jaws of death without realizing or understanding that they are walking into the jaws of death. So they will act without fear, as already stated. And that's something that you can use there. It gets tricky in more realistic settings, like I said, where you're doing the more Tarantino-esque time skip, where you're showing what's happened in the future and then going back to a beginning point, because you have to get the players to that point. But what that really takes, though, is understanding what the characters' motivations are, what they're driven by, what they're going to react to. And well, for another specific example in this regard, this was for a D20 modern setting I was running. It was our cops and robbers-esque setting where players got to choose whether they were going to be police officers or criminals. The police officers got more training, access to better gear, but had to follow some fairly strict guidelines. They could try to bend the rules, but getting caught was definitely a very real possibility and had some severe repercussions, as it does. Well, anyways, skipping that particular point for now. The criminals obviously had way more flexibility in that regard, but of course, getting caught definitely has repercussions for criminals. And, well, there's one character in particular. It was actually this player's second character. He was the brother of the first character who got murdered by trying to start a gang war in order to create some kind of upheaval in the city. It was definitely not the most well thought out plan, but then again, that actually kind of fits with the character. And he died first play session. And so, second time around, we had to introduce another character who basically was part of a biker gang, and he came out to get revenge for the death of his brothers. Certainly good enough character motivation for most games, for most characters in RPGs, and the fact that we got to play it out just made it even better. Well, there was one particular gang he was looking for. It was the TikTok set of the Nuevo Estrada gang, I want to say. Some of the details are a little bit lost, but point is, this was the particular gang that his brother had been picking fights with and trying to make it look like they're moving in on other gangs' turf and getting things going. Anyways, his brother died, and so he was going after the gang responsible. And I described a particular point where he's on a bridge. There's an overhead news crew in a helicopter. They're filming everything. They see the gunfire going back and forth. And what ended up happening is, from that point where I described something happening in the future, we went back about an hour or so to where he's sitting at a diner. And he sees some of the Estrada guys from the TikTok set going by. And once they go by, he goes after them and follows them. Well, as he's tailing them, he finds a couple of their hideouts, but then as they leave, they realize he's following them, so they bail and they start booking it. So he goes after them, and it turns into this chase where they go on to the interstate. It's in LA and California. It's definitely a lot of traffic, and they're flying along. There's a rolling gun battle as they go along, and one of the other players who joined in that session got caught up in it, and he's being drug along, and it hits that point where they're in this rolling gun battle on the interstate. There's the news crew overhead filming everything, and I managed to keep roped in another player who was acting independently of all these other shenanigans going on, and he ends up detonating the bridge, which created conditions for them to escape. But point is, I understood what that character's motivation was. I understood how to get him into a rolling gunfight on the interstate, which would attract a news crew. It was a little bit of flexibility in what the players were doing, understanding their goals, is dangling that bait in front of them and getting them to move in the direction I needed them to, while leaving it as their choice. He didn't have to follow them, and certainly he could have started fights sooner, but that would have still only provided me opportunity. Some of them managed to get to their vehicles while you were gunning the rest of them down. And it looks like that one of the people that was getting away is actually somebody in charge. He was barking orders, screaming at everybody else, and that would have been probably more than enough to get him motivated to go after them, had it come to that where he had made a couple of different decisions. And that's where the flexibility again comes in. Being prepared to, dangle a little bit of bait. If they take it, they chomp down on it a little too soon, well, here's another piece for you to keep going along and keep dragging them towards that predetermined endpoint you want them at. And so it can be an incredibly useful thing, and an very, very much so entertaining bit of gameplay that makes the players kind of look at you and go, wow, I can't believe you actually managed to pull that off. Which is actually what my friend had said. This was a guy I'd gamed with for a long time until, last couple of years. Group split up, but story for another time. He actually looked at me and said, "You pulled that off. I can't believe it. That was actually really good. That was fun." And that really, really hit home for me because that was one of the most elaborate things I tried to pull off. And I couldn't believe it worked. It went well. But that, again, predetermined point, a predetermined destination, a fixed point in time, making it happen can be tricky, but you can do it. And when you pull it off, it is so cool. And in the case, particularly in the case of more high fantasy games, where you're dealing with multiple gods, religions, all these different deific kind of characters, omniscient characters who can be kicking out prophecies left and right across the different worlds in the multiverse and across dimensions. Well, if something doesn't come to pass as prophesized, well, you can just say, well, the skeins of fate have been altered and twisted by other forces. And or you can even just come out and say, not all prophecies pan out, and some prophecies are absolute bullshit. It's definitely a valid response, but I'd caution you against abusing that a little bit too much if prophecy is something that consistently crops up. Not only that, but you can also salvage prophecies that don't seem to come to pass. You can do little things like, well, the tone that you found this prophecy in, it had clearly been ancient and it's missing some pages. And upon second viewing in that book, you do see that there's a section missing, a page that's missing, probably right between that is between these sections of the prophecy. Maybe you need to find that. Something like that. Again, it's different little narrative tools and leaps like that you don't want to abuse too often because it definitely starts to pull players out a little bit from whatever story it is you're crafting for them. But you have different ways of maneuvering the pieces, giving little nudges here and there, and adjusting things slightly in order to achieve what you want to have achieved. Currently, I'm running something similar right now, but in case that player is watching, given the infrequency with which we're actually able to meet up, given the state of the world and times right now, I'm not going to spoil things yet, but things are kind of progressing in a fun way, an interesting way, and I can't wait to see what happens next with it. But prophecies are a lot of fun. They're a valuable tool. Fixed points in time that you want your players to arrive at. It can be a lot of fun to get there, tricky to pull off, but once you do, it's absolutely amazing watching the players' faces light up like, wow, how do you understand how to move things so that we all arrived here as described before? Another thing you can do, well, in that case, you're exploiting their hindsight bias because they remember what that fixed point was, but they don't necessarily need to know that you didn't have a specific foolproof plan figured out. You just need to understand the player motivations, character motivations, and how to bait them and get them moving through the hoops you want them to move. And even if things don't quite go to plan, you just dangle another piece of bait in front of them that brings them to the desired conclusion. Be flexible, be reasonable, don't railroad your players, and don't be a dick. Granted, that's a standard rule for life in general, but still, don't railroad. Be flexible and have fun. That's the most important part. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Next time around, I think I might like to revisit loot, so come around next Sunday if you want to get in on that. I'm certainly more than happy to be doing so. I love coming up with unique pieces of gear, rewards, trophies, stuff like that. But if you enjoyed today's video, then go on down there, hit the like button, go and comment, or even if you didn't like it, if you find what I was rambling on about today very, very annoying, something you don't enjoy, well, hit dislike and go down there in the comments and let me know why you dislike it. Let's engage in that discussion there. Certainly, I'm more than happy to jump into things and talk and debate back and forth with people. And if you have been enjoying content here, well, I've got a couple more videos that are popping up over this away that maybe you'll enjoy as well. But with that said, for now, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.